Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. Thank you so much, Dune, for having us. And congrats, by the way, on all the recent announcements. Super exciting. So we're going to be talking about what it takes to build a Web3 project. Yes, I'm the founder of the Defiant, the best information source for DeFi and Web3. And our panelists we have a really stacked panel here with Stani, the founder and CEO of Avara, of Aave and Lens. We have Smokey the Bera from Berachain, and Keone Hon, the co-founder of Layer 1 Monad. What it takes to build a Web3 project, I narrowed it down to a few key topics that is important to consider when building. And so these are decentralization, finding product market fit, community and marketing, tokenomics and tech, regulation, and just learning from others. So let's start with decentralization. And this is a question for all of the panel. Decentralization obviously is the reason why, or one of the main reasons why blockchains exist in the first place. But it's not black or white. It's a spectrum, and different projects fall on different parts of the spectrum. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, how to consider where your project should be on that spectrum, and how to consider the different trade-offs. Like, one of the main trade-offs is usually user experience, like how easy do you want to make things for users. Usually more decentralizations means it's a bit harder for users to get used to all the on-chain experience, and the inverse is true. But there are other trade-offs as well. So maybe, Stani, you want to start off and then we go down.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a little bit of context about Aave. So Aave protocol, one of the main protocols that we're known at Avara. So it's effectively deployed on over 13 different networks, and at the same time, it's fully governed by the Aave DAO. So it's pretty much decentralization you can find on the spectrum, and it's actually quite interesting because decentralization is really valuable. But the thing that we've been always thinking about is that how do we build a good product for the users? And actually, when I started in the very early days before even Aave, back in Eatland days, so I kind of saw an opportunity to use smart contracts and to use decentralization and community governance as a way to build a more resilient product. And resiliency at that time and still today for me means is that you can build something that doesn't break. And building something that doesn't break in financial context is really good, because that means that you can build something that is has durability from that perspective. And first of all, I think it's important to ask yourself is that whether your product even needs decentralization or should be on-chain. So that's the first thing. In most cases, the actual answer is no, it doesn't need, and that's totally fine. But if there's some value in that case, then you should understand when that decentralization path comes to your use case. And in most cases, you can start purely by building on a simple database, simple application, and try to kind of reach a product market fit and momentum, and slowly decentralizing from that. So, and in some cases, you might not be able to decentralize your product, and it can be a service as well. So I think it's also like a journey when you start, but you have to also approach from a product perspective, how on-chain really helps your product, and if it does, what it actually, when that decentralization comes into play, because with decentralization you get other types of kind of challenges as well, which might be governance or other things that might slow you down as a builder.
Yeah, I tend to agree with a number of the points that Stani made. For a little bit of context, Berachain is an EVM identical L1 powered by proof of liquidity. What that means is that it effectively turns liquidity into security on the network and uses it to help power the applications built on top of it. I think when considering some of the trade-offs that Camila mentioned, especially as an L1, you think a lot about user experience and performance. And there's a number of ways to skin that cat, whether that be better account abstraction solutions, your fund.xyzs, your AA wallets, your most recent EIPs, Coinbase wallets, so on and so forth, that allows you to get that nice experience of paying with Apple Pay, using your Face ID, whatever you might want to do. But at the same time, I think especially as a layer 1 network, that should really be the base plate for a number of other things, and ideally hundreds if not thousands of productive applications. You want to have an incredibly decentralized validator set, and you want to be able to sustain the network's, I'd say, robustness over time with that in mind, whether that be geographical distribution, client diversity, whatever it is in between. When we think about this from Berachain, we think about it from a couple of different angles. On one hand, Berachain's proof of liquidity effectively means that every time a block is produced, depending on the validator that proposed it, it is actually forwarding those block rewards towards applications in the ecosystem, helping them increase their capital efficiency, drive down their user acquisition costs, etc. And what that also means is that each validator sort of has individual financial economic incentives, which we hope promotes decentralization over time and sort of avoids some of the problems that we've seen, perhaps most obviously in Cosmos chains, where you see 3 or 5 validators that can take over the network, or even to some extent on ETH with Lido and Coinbase being able to consolidate meaningful amounts of LSTs, etc. And then the second part, especially as you mentioned, right, just around that performance side, is making sure it's scalable and usable over time. And the nice bit about being EVM identical, as opposed to solely EVM compatible, is that Berachain actually allows you to run unmodified ETH execution clients, and you can basically build an L2 with OP stack, ARP orbit, etc. To Berachain in the same way as you might on mainnet or ETH mainnet. So the nice little part about that is that while we have single slot finality at the core level on the chain itself, you still have the ability to build these network extensions, app-specific rollups, all sorts of stuff that allows the L1 to maintain its sovereignty and its decentralization, while having extensions of the network that perform in their own ways. So do I think it's a perfect solution? No, I think it's tough to get a perfect solution, but it's certainly one that we hope promotes decentralization while maintaining performance over time.
I just want to mention a couple of very brief things. I agree with Stani that one of the real benefits of decentralization is resilience. So in blockchain, we have systems that have hundreds or thousands of nodes that are pure replicas of each other that are maintained, and that replication is maintained through a performant consensus mechanism. That means that even if some of the nodes get knocked offline, we still have a perfect ledger and perfect state, and when those nodes come back, there's a way for them to kind of like catch up and get back to the same state. So at the end of the day, decentralization, from my perspective, is, well, first of all, it's why we're here, and second of all, it's enabled by technology. We need better technology to enable really decentralized networks to be much more performant so that we can scale to many, many, many more users. And so that ultimately I think a vision that a lot of us have is like the super app, the WeChat of the world, where we have embedded payments, we have decentralized identity, we have people that have their accounts with everything baked in already, and developers can come to this environment and plug in and immediately get access to all these users. I think that's what decentralization and decentralized networks enable, and just excited to see the growth of these networks to many, many, many more users.
I also think it applies a lot for the particular use case. So like what I mentioned about Aave, obviously like Aave at the moment has roughly 24, 25 billion worth of assets as net deposits into the protocol. So something like DeFi, you have to have quite significant resilience and decentralization, and that is the reason people choose to build, for example, on Ethereum and everything that is compounded from that. But then you have use cases like, for example, on the other side of the spectrum, taking Lens as an example, where we're building a resilient social network. And what we realized there is that for those kind of a consumer and social transactions, you don't need the exact same level of decentralization and security. So it's a lot about that particular use case, what you're building, and it goes from finance, where you have to have a very strong system that is really, really hard to take down. And then towards something where you can actually compromise because you get that speed and scalability as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the takeaways is that decentralization should be a means to an end and not an end in itself. Otherwise, you become kind of a radical of decentralization that's not thinking about the end user or the end use case. So I think you've all mentioned how decentralization needs a reason to exist, and maybe that's what can help builders answer, okay, where in the spectrum do you fall? It's like, why do you need decentralization? How does it serve your user? And I think in this case, because we have two layer one founders, it's extremely important. Like, you're the base layer, so you do need that resiliency. In the case of Aave as well, you're like a base layer for finance, which, it's people's money at stake, so you do need that level of security and censorship resistance. But like you said, with Lens, there's a reduced degree of security that is still good for that use case. Okay, next topic is product market fit, and this one is for you, Stani. So yeah, like you mentioned before, Avara, Aave, Lens, there was ETHLend. So you've been building in the space for many years now, iterating on product. So interested to hear your thoughts, like what lessons have you taken away from that kind of like holy grail of finding product market fit as a founder?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think resiliency is also part of that. So I think it's really hard to always find what really works and what brings the users. And I think in pretty much all of our products we've ever built so far, it's been we never get the product right at the first kind of like a try. So it's a process that just takes time to find out what really actually is something that the users are going to use. And that's basically what we did back in the days with, for example, ETHLend, and we built something really interesting, and we had to optimize it to a point where it's really good experience, but also kind of like a better product that you will find elsewhere. And also the timing is really important, because at the time when Aave was launching back in 2020, January, that was pretty much when COVID started to get more widespread. There was massive lockdowns going in, so people had time to actually explore DeFi when you have higher yield compared to traditional finance. And then came the DeFi summer. So the timing is absolutely important in that case. And I don't think timing is something that's, it comes in cycles as well. So I do think that everyone who is here is still very early in the space, and considering everything that we're actually building. So I think that's a really important thing to notice, that it's really hard to build a product and get it right in your first or second year, or maybe third year. And you have to have some sort of resiliency to keep on going. And overall, I think it's also like a process where you have to kind of like understand what your users are doing and what is actually happening in your product, and try to iterate. And some sort of like brute force as well, where you're trying a lot of things and then iterate to the direction that what's actually working. So it's a complicated process, and those who you are here that are actually working with products, and you probably know how frustrating it is, but over time, things will simplify, and you'll find something that is going to be useful.
Yeah, so perseverance is the name of the game. Just keep trying, keep at it, fail fast, try new things. I guess like as long as you have money in the bank to keep trying, just go for it, right?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's another thing. Like, if you still the funding piece of it, but like sometimes, I mean, prediction markets are really exciting kind of example to look into, because some of the earliest prediction markets were like kind of like in the early days of Ethereum. That was like one of the use cases that were predicted to be quite significant, and they didn't really take off until more recently. And obviously, it's still unclear the path forward for prediction markets, but it just showcases how long time it takes, and how, you know, depends on that opportunity that comes and also having a good product. Polymarket is a great example where the team has focused since 2017 purely on getting the product right, and the timing just went. The timing just became good at the same time. So it does take quite a decent amount of time.
Okay, and then another key piece, obviously, is community marketing, getting the word out there about that great product. And so, Smokey, I'd love to bring this topic over to you. I think, you know, Berachain has become known for having a great community. So I'd love your thoughts on how to get there, like how to create a supportive community of builders, users, and so, like, what does community mean in crypto? Why is it important? And yeah, how to build that? Like, how much money does it take? Does it take money? Do you need a huge marketing budget? Can you do it? Can you bootstrap it? Yeah, I think like those are really important questions for anyone building a project.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's rarely actually a function of financial resources. I think that can be a nice, you know, tool in your back pocket. And I've attempted to deconstruct what has worked and what hasn't worked for us a few times. And while I don't think there's a perfect playbook, especially because of just how fast the space moves, and the simple fact that, like, you know, once something has been done playbook-wise, the novelty is gone, right? The total number of users who are looking at things in crypto or who are broadly exploring the market is kind of relatively low still, which is also one of the largest functions of community, right? I think that you can have the best application builders in the world, and they can be building the most cracked products, but at the end of the day, if it isn't distributed and if people don't care about it, then, you know, it's all a little bit moot, right? The fun fact is that we actually don't have a marketing team at Berachain. We have a number of folks who focus on ecosystem growth and BD and doing everything we can to basically help, I'd say, support the projects in the ecosystem. But we haven't been able to find groups that we think can actually, you know, run a marketing function, because I think the bar is so high for what that should look like in terms of real performance. And I think we've seen very, very few teams truly pull that off in the space, especially because it's such a multifactorial thing, especially within crypto, right? On one hand, part of it is, you know, sentiment driven by price action, and I'll say a non-trivial part of it is that. On the other hand, it's some of the applications built on the network, it's how the users feel, it's really everything in between. But if I had to dial it back to a few of the things I think really matter, one, I think it's important to optimize for that early community, or the people who are the roots of your ecosystem, being incredibly anti-fragile. And what I mean by that is that it's much better to have, you know, 50 or 100 absolutely die-hard advocates for what you're building than 5,000 folks who think it's like kind of cool or kind of okay. Because you want groups who will stand the test of time and who themselves can become, you know, nodes in their own network, who will then go on and onboard more people, spread that good word. I think there's very little to no substitute for actually doing the work and spending the time, whether that be with your early community and builders and just members of the ecosystem, or whether that be with actual, you know, ecosystem projects and people developing applications. Berachain started for complete shits and giggles out of an NFT project of a bunch of bears smoking weed. And what that meant is that we had folks who were on the very far left curve and then folks who were on the very far right curve. And I think that actually spending time with those guys in Discord and voice chats over the span of 2-3 years was what allowed for a lot of that initial community base to really form with you know, a resilience in a different way, right? And I think that after that, it's about ensuring that the growth effort is not just driven by the labs entity or the foundation or whatever it might be. It's actually about empowering and finding people within that community and letting them form their own tribes, their own ecosystems, their own subcultures within a larger organism, and trying to help select and give a platform for excellent people who really do break the mold and who can be good role models for other folks within that community. So for us, I think it's about finding those microcosms and helping them grow. And I think one of the most important things that we've seen and that we've very much tried to espouse is that you don't want to try to cause growth by incentivizing inorganic activity. Like the majority of these questing platforms, airdrop farming programs, stuff that basically gives people an incentive to take a certain action, in many cases ends up being counterproductive long term. People talk about airdrops, for example, as customer acquisition costs. I think that's entirely BS. I think that airdrops are mostly a antiquated means of, some degree of regulatory arbitrage, some degree of, like paying tithes to the community, and some degree of like, trust me, bro, we have users. I think that more than anything, they actually buy sentiment than anything else, if you want to call it that. And rather, what you should actually try to do is select for people within the community or an ecosystem that are, organically taking the actions that you see as constructive, whether that is building apps, content creation, educational material, anything in between, and then try to prompt them up and really spend time with them. And I think part of that is also a matter of being, ever present as a founder, which is of course really tough to do if you're juggling 100 other things. But being accessible over different platforms, whether that be Twitter, Telegram, Discord, whatever it is, and I think demonstrating that one cares. So I think that at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway I've seen from community building is that you have to find a way to give people a reason to believe that this is different, and you have to be able to back that up with time, facts, and hard evidence. And I think that having a very strong underpinning technology stack or a very clear value proposition that actually allows people to clearly zoom out and say, oh hey, I understand why this might help me or might make my life better, is really what it boils down to.
Super interesting stuff, and I think a little bit counterintuitive with what we're seeing in the ecosystem right now, where I think the norm is to create or foster a community with airdrops or the expectation of an airdrop. And yeah, I think it's a bit hit or miss. It kind of depends on whether you have a good product that makes people stick around after the airdrop. But I do agree that it does create so much hype in the meantime, before that actually plays out, that it kind of adds so much noise to the space. So I think yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, finding people who are organically contributing to the project and empowering those people, and I think that will just attract the right kind of builder, the right kind of user. But in the end, I think it always just comes down to having a great product to begin with, because then if you don't, you just won't find that organic builder or that organic user to pop up.
No amount of loyalty points will save your product, especially like in crypto, where like just liquidity and users move all the time. So it's like it's as simple as like the best product wins. I think it's that simple.
Okay, so that's a great segue to the next topic with Keone, which is tech and tokenomics. So with Monad, you guys are trying to advance EVM with parallelized execution and a new structure for data sets. And there's this maybe meme in tech or in just startups that whether or not the best tech wins. So would love your thoughts in that. Like what place does tech have in the overall success of a product or project more broadly?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think tech is really fundamental obviously to the success of any project. I think it's the backbone for any project, for any community, but it's certainly not the only thing that's needed in order to build a successful product or business ultimately. With Monad is a completely, it's a technology project. So Monad is a technology project that is bringing optimistic parallel execution, bringing a new database, bringing a new BFT consensus mechanism, and bringing asynchronous execution to Ethereum. And we think that these are different architectural improvements that ultimately will find their way to other blockchains as well, and ultimately be foundational to overall increasing throughput of these systems, which we think is needed for mass adoption. But as a technology project, what we care most about is seeing these technologies ultimately get adopted. And I think an interesting thing about crypto is that, in terms of brand value, the brand value really does accrue to the innovator. So we've seen a lot of cases where, because everyone is building open source code, and so the first thing that developers of open source code tend to worry about is like, what happens when someone forks the code that I wrote and launches a fork? And we've just seen time and time again that innovation is ultimately recognized and contributes to the brand value, which is why, for example, Uniswap invented or created the XYK AMM, and it's been forked many, many, many times, but Uniswap is still here as an incredibly valuable brand, an incredibly valuable app. So I think that the reason for this is that a lot of applications ultimately are marketplaces. So you can think of any blockchain as a marketplace where developers are bringing their apps to the market and users are coming and interacting with that app. Or Aave is a marketplace where people who have capital bring their capital and earn yield on it and loan it out to someone else who needs that capital as a loan. And marketplaces really benefit from network effects. And the network effect is really reinforced by innovation, reinforced by technology. So I think that overall this is one reason why crypto will prevail. It's that we have a mechanism where there's open source and the ability for folks to stand on the shoulders of giants and continue to innovate, but also value still accrues, brand value still accrues to the innovator, which I think fosters an environment that ultimately encourages innovation.
And it's a really good marketplace. It doesn't take 30% of the fees, so that's quite good.
Yeah, I would also just add that, like my pitch for any app developer in Web 2 that is considering building in Web 3, I hope that this is like it's just kind of like a brainworm that I have, but hopefully it's helpful, would really be that when you build in Web 3, you get instant distribution, you get instant access to users, you get instant access to a payment mechanism that's baked in already, and we already have this account balance system and tokens and so on. You get access to all of this stuff, and if you wanted to build that in Web 2, it would mean that you're building on some sort of closed, permissionless system, like like think of any of the big payment systems in the world. Like you can build on top of them, but they charge a significant fee, and you're ultimately always just building on top of them. With crypto, the cool thing is that we have open standards, and you're building with an open standard, in most cases the EVM, which means that you don't have vendor lock-in effect. And if the ultimate base layer service provider starts charging too much, you can migrate somewhere else. So with Monad, one of the reasons why Monad is EVM compatible is because we're building for that open standard, the EVM, and we don't want developers to suffer from vendor lock-in effect. We want them to be able to go wherever they can get the best prices for users transacting on top of the base layer, as well as where they can get distribution. And we think that Monad will be the best place for those developers because there's an incredible community, there's incredible distribution power already, but it's an open standard. And I think that, like I have this kind of like a cheat sheet in the back of my head when talking to a Web 2 developer. Like these are incredibly powerful to be able to build for this composable standard.
Definitely. Okay, so about tech, it's one of the important factors when building, not the most important, but probably up there in the top 5, top 3. And innovation, in the end, does accrue to the brand doing the innovation, even though we are in an open source system and code gets forked. I think you're right that we've seen historically that the creator gets recognized in the end. And then the other interesting thing to highlight is that everyone can use that code, and that's what's special about building crypto. And then another, like, one key question when building also is where to build. And I know, this is obviously a special ecosystem where, everyone is distributed and the tech itself is distributed, but in the end, you do need to set up HQ somewhere or, have your team somewhere. And today, we've had tons of development on this front with the new, election in the US and expected to be friendlier there. So right now, just, quickly to get a sense from you on, like, where is it the best place in your opinion to build in crypto right now? Yeah, whoever wants to take it off.
I mean, just to clarify, the question is geographically, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah? Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think that the U.S. is going to be an increasingly better climate. I don't think that it's fair to say that it'll be perfect as of yet, as that probably requires a fair bit of, regulatory transformation over time. But it seems like the current regime will be a lot better. And I think if you look around, there's a lot of folks that set up shop in New York, sometimes SF, but it is very tough to get away from that as a mecca or a hub in crypto when it comes to both business and development talent. I think I'd probably toss Dubai in the ring at the moment. I'm not based there, to be clear. I'm based in Toronto in Canada. But I think that I've seen a pretty meaningful talent pool move over there. There's meaningful access to capital. Everyone makes the pilgrimage, whether that is for Binance Blockchain Week or Token or any of the other high capital events around there. And they have a very progressive regulatory environment when it comes to virtual assets and their effective legality and or regulation. So I think we're seeing a lot of the top builders head over there, whether that be Mert and some of the folks who have been emblems in the Solana ecosystem, and even teams that I've seen and have grown in the Berachain ecosystem over time. So I'd probably throw Dubai in the ring for now. Not to mention that for tax-free enjoyers, there's probably something to be appreciated there as well.
Yeah, I think it really depends, how you get ambitious people together and build something, something incredible that doesn't exist. And I think it's not really tied to a geographical location, but I do think that certain cities just have more of those people, and it might be easier to come together. So some type of work requires maybe people coming together and spending time in the same room to ideate, brainstorm, and and that really depends on the product itself. But I think like what makes our space very interesting is that a lot of these successful projects, they are operating globally, so they are partially remote or fully, and they come together more often annually. But I think it really depends on what you're actually building. But I do think that, at least speaking from our perspective, we do have an office in London that's kind of like our off-chain HQ, and we really like being there. And I think the crypto policy will change there in the future. We're also based in US. We have an office in New York, and we have talent across globally. For example, one of our products that we're building and we acquired last year is the family wallet, and this team is actually operating also across globally, from US, Europe, all the way to Australia. So all of our products, the talent is really everywhere, and we're just finding ways what works really well for a particular product. But I don't think there's specific requirements, but I do think, at least for me personally, being able to spend time with the people I work day-to-day basis has incredible value. But now, given the election, obviously, results, it's starting to look very good for US. And obviously, we have to see some concrete policy and changes before you can actually open fully. But I do think there's now a more positive and optimistic stance on crypto, and I think this will continue.
Yeah, you know, at the end of the day, the important thing is being around other smart people that are grinding and putting in the hours, and that environment, that energy is incredibly impactful. At Monad, we have sort of two different initiatives that are going in completely opposite directions there. The first is, you know, I'm based in New York. We have an office in New York, and we have a builder space, a floor in our building, which is just set aside for builders to come and co-work. And we think that having an environment like that is really productive, being around other people that are early stage entrepreneurs. So I'd welcome anyone who is an early stage builder to reach out. You can DM me after this on Twitter if you're interested in visiting the space and potentially getting access. So that's sort of, you know, the New York pill specifically. And we have this meme kind of going on of American DeFi. I want to see more American DeFi. No offense to London DeFi as well, but I want to see the growth of more American DeFi.
We're in America too, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one direction. And then the other one is that, you know, I think that there are incredible hubs of talent popping up in different cities. And so we have Monad Madness, which is a pitch competition that is traveling around the world. Our first Monad Madness was in New York. The second one is here in Bangkok, Saturday, Sunday. But it's, you know, an initiative to basically put a bunch of builders on stage in front of incredible investors and give them a platform to showcase what they've built and raise money. And I think that getting more access to capital in all parts of the world is really important. So we kind of have this initiative going on to promote that.
Nice. Well, so lots of America bullishness and New York specifically, which is great to hear because I'm also there. So we'll hit you up on the working space. And I think conferences are obviously another great way to get teams together with everyone just like mostly working from all over the globe in crypto. And DuneCon is a great example of that. So yeah, this was a great
Yeah,
panel.
the best builders are on chain, right?
Yes. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. We ran out of time. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.